Okay, we're live streaming.
Yeah, but as it exists now, it's actually two.
No, it's down for a full house.
Yep.
This is the one that's
Okay, so welcome to the extraordinary council meeting today. And I'll come to a little bit of housekeeping shortly. So I just need to run through some basics. Any apologies? Nobody? No, all here. Peter's here as well. Nobody zooming and no public forum. Now, in relation to the agenda that we have in front of us, I've advised you all today that I want to remove recommendations 3 through 8. Two reasons for that. The secondary reason is that we'd like us just to have a fresh discussion about Wokena Place and not have the confusion of ICL finances. But more importantly, last night myself, Tom and Grant met with Michael Day, our Chief Executive, about some of the information that's contained in the finance report from ICL, which we're not clear about. So we've asked Andrew today and that we want a further written report on that, and particularly around the $40 million float, which wasn't our recommendation as a stakeholder in ICL through Holdco, and nor was it what the public recommended for us as well. So that sits on the table. Hopefully we'll have another meeting within a week or so, which will probably dovetail with another meeting, and we'll get to that issue when we have a bit more information. In relation to the suite of options that we've got around Wokena Place, I'm about shortly, and I've written to you all and advised you earlier in the day, to move an amendment on option 1. But before I do that, just for the public's perspective as well, we were also to consider the pillars or the columns as well. We've had some very late advice in the last couple of days to tell us that the pillars potentially are under the earthquake prone level of 34%. So that makes a significant difference in our decision making. And so Russell has advised that the under 34 NBS rating, or the advice that we've been given to date, is subject to analysing what the base of the pillars are sitting on. So we're getting some work done on that. So my recommendation is we don't discuss that today, that we go forward and wait for that final advice. There are two issues with the NBS rating. You'll all know that we've had this debate before. A National Building Standard code of under 34 requires remedial action, but it doesn't require remedial action today. So that basically means that we would have, because it's sitting on an arterial road, 12.5 years to strengthen or remove those pillars. So we had that question at a workshop yesterday. I think Trish mentioned about that. One of the downsides of that is we also have some, I guess, some moral or ethical issues as well. So how would it be if we left the pillars there at this stage, knowing they were under the 34 limit, having quite heavy traffic through the bottom end of S Street, including people from a new hotel, and we have an earthquake. And while you can technically say, well, we had 12.5 years to fix it, it doesn't sit well morally if people are hurt by pillars that collapse. So again, seeking some advice from Russell and his engineering team. Hopefully that will be back in time for our next meeting on the 28th of November. He's smiling and nodding. So we'll be able to address the pillars at that stage. So we just basically left with the Wokena Place options 1, 2 and 3, which are sitting in the agenda, and I will move an amendment to option 1. And I've already written about this. So option 1 has a clause within it. Can you bring that up? I'll come back to that. So the option 1 has a statement that when you get to yeah, there it is in 11. Option 1. Oh, sorry. After the word buses, which is in the first sentence of option 1, I'm recommending that we include the wording that says, while retaining the clock structure and using the space to the north and south of the structure for vehicle and pedestrian movement. Now, the rationale for putting this up is I've listened carefully to what was said at public submissions, and also carefully listened to what we've been saying around the table in our workshops, and it seems to me that there is some potential middle ground between us going to option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is that we have traffic going through Watton Place. Option 2 is leave it alone and retain it for whatever purposes need to be. And I think there can be a win-win by introducing a middle ground. So if somebody else would like to move. Seconded, Tom, thank you. Before I put the vote, anybody like to have some discussion about that?
So, when you say for vehicle access, that's expanding it from bus only. Is that what you're intending? Well,
I'm not at this stage, but I don't want to preclude what the design features might come back. Like in most places where you have, I've got the hands, when you have what they call shared space, and Queenstown's a good example of that, it's open, but the only things that tend to go through it are taxis because nobody else wants to go through it because it's just too slow. I mean, the speed might be 5 k's an hour or 10 k's an hour, so there's no benefit because it's up for others to decide.
So if we change it from bus only access, which would have been the bollard with some form of mechanism that controlled who could access it, you're now saying any vehicle, provided that they're turning in the right direction, would be able to go through.
Well, that's what a shared space is.
I don't believe that we consulted on that basis.
Well, again, I've taken advice on the amendments that I'm looking to, and the general consensus I got back from talking to staff and to councillors as well was that we scoped with the public quite a range of issues. What I'm proposing is sort of halfway between 1 and 2.
Chair, you haven't actually changed the word buses at the moment unless you intend to. It still says buses.
Yep. But I did use the word vehicle.
The vehicle.
Did you intend to use it? Was it just?
Well, I just left it open. I mean, because I don't see the future use being bollards that jump up and jump down. But
so for clarity, you intend the use of the word vehicle to mean other vehicles than buses?
Well, I think if you're going forward, you'd think about, can taxis use them to go to and from?
Are you intending it, for clarity's sake, Your Worship, for it to be much like how Esk Street is used at the moment?
Well, Esk Street doesn't actually have any parkings. Like, we're not suggesting that you could park and walk in a place, but you could travel through the space. If you look at Queenstown again, very little parking space on those arterial roads that run around the mall, but they do have shared access, which is, I guess, middle ground between spaces being vehicle concentrated and the alternative is pedestrian concentrated. And there's always winners and losers in that, and it seems to me that most of the development going on around the country is a shared space with a speed reduction which encourages people not to go. And if you look at the Queenstown model, which I've looked at and sat there and watched it, people don't go through the shared space because it's just so slow. It's just not worth doing. Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So the use of the word vehicle is going to add confusion for the public into what we're passing. The automatic assumption for our ratepayers and residents will be that that word includes all vehicle access, including private vehicles, delivery vehicles. The fact that tour buses is left is not actually going to deal with that because the word vehicle has widened it. I think that either it needs changed so that vehicle is the only meaning, or it needs to be limited to buses. Otherwise, I think we're going to, if it passes, we're going to end up with
that's okay. So I'll hear what others have got to say, and then I'll ask Tom what he thinks, because him and I are the mover and seconder. Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, I just need to ask Council to step back a little bit and actually go through the process of accepting the hearings approvals as well, and actually then accept the report. We haven't we've jumped to the recommendations without actually going through accepting the report. So I just want us to, we can accept the hearing component and then move into the report, and then you can step into the recommendations.
Happy to move
just
1 and
skipped a
2
few
of the
steps.
recommendations.
Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. So, Rangi, you had your hand up.
Yeah, look, can you get back to the screen you had with option 1, option 2? Oh, no, well, sorry, I thought we were back. Yeah, we're all good. Just back to that option 1, option 2. Option 2, it says access from Levin Street.
Yeah.
Now, buses, the consulted on option, and the only option I've seen shows the arrow pulling up in Levin Street. It doesn't access the actual site of the hotel. So it's basically pulling alongside Levin Street. So is that what we're still talking about?
Option 2?
The option 2 pulls up alongside Levin Street. It doesn't access. Vehicles can access the car park.
Yep. No, that's not the one in the consultation document. Yeah, so they just pull up in Levin Street. Is that right? Vehicles can access the car park like a normal car, but a bus, there's no way it can come in Levin Street, try and do a turn, and get back out again. It's physically impossible. So I'm just ruling that out. Yeah, Russell, can you help me out there?
It can't do that. That's why we're talking about option 1.
Sure.
Correct?
Yep.
Is that correct?
All right.
Just making sure.
Option 2 is that, as per the consultation document, which showed a bus parking option on Levin Street.
Yeah. Thanks. That's it. Beauty.
Coming to the side, Alan.
Finally, quick
Oh,
question.
hey.
You were talking about option 1 and option 2 here, but you've actually got 3 options.
Yep.
Now, from what I'm understanding, if I look at option 3, isn't that closer to what everybody's talking about, which is a hybrid area for pedestrians and for vehicles?
Right.
You've got option 1, A, B, and C. 1, 2, and 3.
C is from the rear of the hotel. No
Sorry?
one's suggesting amending it.
No.
got a
no,
Hybrid
just
public realm with tour bus access to the rear of hotel and allocate up to 15 points, blah, blah, blah. Is that not really what you're talking about for option 1?
No.
No.
The rear of the hotel was the one we consulted on,
Yep.
where
So-
the public was shown
Option 3 came
The
off the
option-
crescent
Through the middle.
and through
Right.
the space in the middle between.
the right of way that's a private
Yeah,
right of
and
way.
then round to the front of the thing, and that wasn't deemed to be suitable.
Second part of the question is now by having a option 1 point, whatever you want to call it,
Yep.
are you not getting into the actual design as part of this? Shouldn't we just be voting on the fact that you have access for vehicles or not? A 1 and 2, access for
Well-
vehicles or not, and then after we get some design stuff from staff, then we vote on how it's actually going to look, as opposed to voting on how it's going to look now.
Well, I guess the issue is the issue of transport through Wokna or not.
So in
And-
fact,
No,
have you got
hang
3
on,
options again?
hang on, councillor, if you want to ask a question, give me the chance to.
It's not time to ask you a
reply.
question. Maybe.
You've asked me whether we should just be voting on transport through or not.
Yes.
What I'm saying to you is that given the workshop we had yesterday and the one we've had previously, there is some degree of wanting to retain some of the features or functions of Wokna Place, which 1 does not allow for in some ways. And
Bearing
so,
in mind you can't make decisions at a workshop,
I understand that.
do you not think that you're still getting into the realms of design? I mean, today's initial thing was access or no access. And now you're getting into design, saying, well, let's leave the clock in the middle,
Yep,
let's go left
okay.
and let's go right. That's
So
design.
So,
Isn't that something that should come back
so-
to us in the future?
well, that's something I don't agree with. So you'll have the option to vote for option 1 or the alternative, which is 1A.
Or
So,
2?
so this amendment that I'm putting, you can vote against that. And if you do, then we're at option 1 that was initially consulted on.
Right.
Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just, I think probably we maybe need to come up with some wording which we're trying to reflect through that, and it's a little bit to Alan's point, we're looking at allowing access off the street through Wokna Place.
Sure.
What that type of vehicle is, whether it's strictly a bus or it's a mixed arrangement, and how that is going to probably come back to Russell's table around what's the advice they would give us around, you know, how a mixed approach to traffic access through Walker Place could work. So do we need to get hung up on the vehicle thing? Can we just call for the global piece the vehicle access, and that may come back that it's just for buses from Russell's table for advice to us at some stage in the process, or do we have to?
So an answer to that is we'd like to make decisions today that guide the design process, and we need to get on with this. It's not a matter of catering for Jeff Thompson and his hotel. Any hotel being built by anybody needs to be serviced in a timely manner. So we don't have time on our side, so we need to move fairly quickly. Hence, ideal to have a decision today. Happy, I'll talk to Tom in a minute after I listen to everybody else about whether we reword the word vehicle, if that's what you want. I'm not hell bent on that. I'll come back to you, Tom. Any other? Yeah, Trish, sorry.
Just to clarify, by choosing option 1, we aren't ruling out the possibility of not having the clock there at some stage. Is that what it's saying? I mean, it says that it's retaining the clock and the columns.
Yes.
But it doesn't say what will happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, I see your hand coming up, Alex. So my view of that is that we've been asked by members of the public, sort of consultation process, and we can argue all day if we want to about whether that was representative of what's in the community or not. But I guess it's reasonable to assume a starting point could be to retain the clock and to use the space either side. If we get a 6 months or a year down the track and we've beautified the clock, because it is pretty ugly at the moment, and we have some uplighting on it and it still doesn't suit our needs, then I've been advised by staff that we can still take the clock out, but it would be a council decision to do so. And it would take away the emotions of buses and everything else, because if you took the clock out, the bus would still go through and the footpaths would still go through. So that doesn't preclude us getting to that decision at some stage. Not trying to kick it down the track. I'd like to get a firm position today.
Thank you.
Alex.
Thank you, Worship. I see this as a really fantastic compromise from, I guess, everybody, any of the submitters that we've looked at, any of the feedback that we've had in our digital channels. It's really clear that there seems to be the two really strong sides of the story here, where they're really hell-bent on retaining it in the same situ that it is now, or people are happy to see the livelihood of East Street West actually, come to fruition. So with what you've got up there, it sets the intention that we have said that, yep, we will retain the clock structure, but we'll be allowing vehicle use in a shared space manner, not too dissimilar to what we've got in Esk Street, to allow for that function to occur. I think what we've got there with your amendment is fantastic, and allows for everything to happen. It doesn't preclude us from going through to the design phase in the next step, but it's based on what we've consulted on. It shows in option 1 that traffic will be allowed through there, but it doesn't stop those hospitality spaces or those shared spaces from thriving either.
Yep. Thank you for that. So, and this is a bit of a piece issue between the two options. I mean, I was very in favour of 1. I am still very in favour of 1. If it was up to me personally, I'd take the whole structure out and recreate S Street further down. But got to listen to what your community's saying. So I think that's some middle ground. I don't want us to get to a stage where we give Russell and John, who's sitting in the back of the room as well, hiding away, a mixed message on what we want them to do with the design. If the option is 1A, for argument's sake, we want him to go away and know that that's what the option is, not to come back with some designs that change that option and we come back to another consultation process, because people are crying out for a decision on it. And that's not Jeff, that's others as well. Anybody else? Right, Tom.
Oh no, sorry, Leslie.
Oh no, sorry, Leslie.
Thank you. So, since we seem to be discussing the matter at this point,
yep.
I just want to say that the suggested change to the wording is actually just overemphasising a preference for option 1 before we have voted on it. So it's a compromise, but it's a compromise that's saying the best option is to allow vehicles through, and here's a way that we can put a bit of compromise to save some of the other features that people said they liked about Wapna Place. I still believe the genuine decision to make today is whether or not as a council we agree with vehicle access at all through Wapna Place. My own preference, and I declare it now, is that we talked about people first Esk Street connection. That is still my preference. I am not, as a first preference, a believer in the vehicle access option. Even with the suggested compromise, I think we got a clear steer from our submitters, and we do have to take our submitters seriously. I'm sorry, I do not buy into the argument that because we only had 173 submitters, therefore that can somehow be discounted or given less weight than it deserves. The fact is, we had 173 who were prepared to make their submissions, make their feelings clear. Of that, the majority, and I'll say 86%, were against option 1. Some of them preferred option 3, some of them indicated they would be happy with option 2 or 3, but clearly there was a preference there for option 2, the people first connection. And even with the compromise, I am not convinced that the people of Invercargill were telling us they were happy to have vehicle access through Wapna Place. So I'm sorry, but my preference remains at option 2, and I believe that the suggested amendment to option 1 at the moment, which I will be forced to vote against, does not clarify the main decision we are making today, which is, do we allow vehicle access or not? It merely gives an extra bit of compromise to option 1.
So I don't understand where you come from, but I respect your views. I guess whichever way this vote goes, whether we're voting on 1 or 1A, we are still going to get to the final decision of, do we put vehicles, be it buses or anything else, through Wapna Place, yes or no? And people are polarised on that, and that we'll get to that regardless of whether they have 1 or 1A. So to those that want 2 or 3, then I don't know how you're going to vote on 1 and 1A. I'm just trying to get some middle ground. And if you want to abstain because you don't agree with it, then you don't agree with it. All I'm doing for the people that are prepared to open or partially open up S Street, lower S Street, I'm giving them an alternative option to consider. Alan.
You keep talking about 1A and 1. Yep. I don't see a 1 and a 1A up here anymore. I don't. Where are the? All I see is a 1A.
Yep. So
where is option 1, which is just open for open, you know, and then let the designers come back to us with the.
So I've already clarified that, but I'll do it again for your benefit. We had 1 on the table, which is what we consulted on. I've moved an amendment because I think there is some middle ground, which is what we have discussed in workshops previously as 1A. So I will refrain from doing that. I'll just refer to an amendment.
We're going to vote on your amendment first, yeah?
Correct.
And then if it's voted down,
if it's voted down, then we vote on 1 versus another option. Absolutely. Who else said that? No, I haven't. Fresh.
Just want to clarify what you said, Leslie, which is accurate. But 86% is how many people?
There were 173 submissions.
But we're not 86% against.
So of the submissions, 102 selected option 2 or 3, the majority of those.
102.
Yeah. 16 specifically selected option 3, but several of those implied that they'd actually meant to select option 2. 31 said they did not favour any of the options at all. 23 of the 173 went for option 1. That's a clear 86% who did not select option 1.
For anyone listening, what the numbers were.
That's the breakdown.
Very much.
Before I come to you, Tom, I'll clarify a position as well. So for those here last term, we had a museum consultation as well, And the two options that were put in front of the committee were, one, strengthen the Pyramid Museum we've currently got and reopen it. The other option was to wait and see, think of other options. We went outside those two options and voted for a new museum. The overwhelming majority wanted the re-strengthening, about 85%. The other issue is, I guess as councillors, we all know that while you listen to consultations, you don't always have to abide by them. Classic example is, if we had had a public consultation on the vaccine mandate that came up, whatever it was, a year or two ago, given that outside in the street there were probably 300 or 400 or 500 people, we would have got, I suspect, a huge volume of people that were opposed to vaccines submitting, and the rest would have sat silent, given our preferred option was to have the mandate, because we'd have to declare that. That doesn't mean that we would have tipped over that mandate. Tom,
so I think, so I think Councillor Crackett hit the nail right on the head. We had two options that you could, that we sought consultation on. A lot of the people who spoke to us, both in terms of formal submissions and in terms of, social media and conversations that we've had, talked about trying to preserve the heritage aspects of Walkner Place. A very key part of that being the clock. So I think what you have proposed and the rewording of that is a very good compromise, and there's nothing wrong with compromise. I think it's a very, very good compromise. Now, the only thing I would say, though, is that if we think about the reasons why we contemplated tour buses being able to crosswalk the place, was the difficulty, even, extreme difficulty of buses being able to turn in Esk Street West. So in other words, if we had brought them up from Lemon Street and Esk Street West, very, very difficult to turn. So we agreed that for tour buses, well, not agreed, but we agreed that an option for there would be to bring tour buses through Walkner Place, and that way they would not have to turn, they'd be able to continue in a one-way street basically. The same does not apply to taxis and delivery vans and so forth. To me, they can very easily just turn off Leaving Street up into S Street West and, turn around and go back out the same way. I just don't think there's a need. So while I know your change of the word tour buses to vehicles, and I must admit I never actually picked up that point before I seconded it. I just don't think it's necessary. It's the key issue is tour buses. That's the problem. Now, I cannot think of pretty much any pedestrian area anywhere that does not allow some vehicle access. They all do. So by going down this track, I don't think we're doing anything different than most people would do. I mean, if I think about how we access outside this building, how we access the rear of the Civic Theatre, to bring in props and so forth, and bring in trucks and buses through there, is basically a gap in a concrete wall, which drives over the pavement to get into that gap. It's almost exactly analogous to what we're talking about here. So I don't think we're breaking new ground, if you excuse the pun. So I still support the amended words after buses.
Yep.
But I would leave the word tour buses there because I think that's where the need is.
Yep. So we agree on that, Tom. So Michael, if you can reword that out, take the word vehicle out and insert the word buses, which restricts it. Any further discussion just on this amendment, not on the general vote that goes thereafter, Rangi?
It's not on the amendment, but it is critical about option 3, because I don't need Russell's help here, is that option 3 puts in danger critical telecom infrastructure that runs underneath the pathway that the bus would take. So basically what I'm saying, it also has private right-of-way. There's some things built into that access. So I would actually like to see option 3 removed, because I don't want people going down that path and using their vote on 3 when they could have gone 1 or 2, because 3, Russell, do you agree, is not really an option?
Mr. Mayor, to my knowledge, option 3 is not currently technically available to the developer.
Yeah, I just didn't want. Yeah.
Okay. I'll come back to that in a minute, Rangy, about
Right.
removing. Ria.
Mr. Mayor, I've thought about this long and hard and really have taken on board what our submitters have said. And at this stage, I also, as like Leslie, don't support option 1A.
Sure.
From what I can determine, we've been asked, do we support bus access through Wapner, through Wapner Place or not?
Yep.
And we were asked by our submitters and also the people that posted on our social media pages to keep this as a pedestrian access only, and as we talked about yesterday, to give people a reason to go there, because we've focused so much on our new city centre. And for all the reasons that Leslie has said that she can't support option 1A, I'm also very strongly of the same decision.
Yep.
So I'm more in favour of option 2.
Yep. Respect your view. I just want you to consider one thing. I'm not here to convince you.
Yeah.
But if you vote against the amendment, we will come down to 1 or 2 in the original forms, and that will take away the option of having bus. If 1 kicks in, that will change the landscape, because we don't have the ability to keep the clock up.
I completely understand that.
That's okay. That's fine. Barry. No. Evan.
Yes. Like Councillor Soper and Councillor Bond, I feel that this doesn't actually advance the cause of making the decision about bus or no bus. This is just about clock or no clock. We are talking about quite a major change to the use of a space that people, whether they actively use it or not, obviously in the submission phase, felt strongly about. It wasn't just the clock that they felt strongly about, it was the space as a whole and the opportunities that the space provided. The fact that we have not, over a period of 30 odd years, invested in making the space more up to date, more attractive to the change in society's uses for space, is on us as a city, not on the space. What we're offered now is a challenge to make better use of the space, including listening to the people who see value in the clock, in the mechanism, in the historic nature, but most principally towards the whole conversation that is around making pedestrians and people who do not use motor vehicles all the time as important in the inner city as the vehicles. Now, we've made a step towards it, but when we agreed to let cars back into Esk Street, people suddenly discovered that they actually liked an Esk Street with not many cars. So let's not make that same mistake again. Letting anything like a bus access that space, I think, will preclude us from forbidding motorbikes or tuk-tuks or anything that is motorised going down there. And is that really making it people friendly? It's making it bus friendly. It's making it tourist friendly, perhaps. But is it making it the people of the city friendly? And that was I believe, is what we really went out and asked about. The bus access was only part of it. How do we make Wapner Place an interactive, important focus of our city again? So on that basis, I would have to agree with Councillor Soper and Bond. I will not be supporting option 1A or 1.
Well,
not that I get to vote.
Yes, I was just going to mention that. Alex, you're the last comment on this before I put the vote.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we're getting a little bit confused around the impact that allowing, I guess, maximum of about 5 or 6 buses for 2 minutes through a shared space will actually have. The remaining 24.5 hours of the day will be totally dedicated to retaining the intention of what a place has and always would stand for. Well, and if we manage to retain the clock as well, what a beautiful centrepiece that we'll be able to refresh in the centre of our city. I'd also like to point out that 172 submitters of our populace of 57,000 people of Invercargill was 0.3% of the voices of our people. So if they're not yelling at us considerably loudly than they are, that they want to retain this space and they're not happy with what we're considering, then they would have made their voices very well known, like they did around several other sagas that we've gone through, like the museum, over the last couple of years. You know me, you know I'm all about shared spaces and pedestrianisation and inner city play and getting people out and about. But I don't think that allowing buses through there for, 5 minutes is actually going to impact those objectives and outcomes that our submitters like John, who's sitting in the gallery there, were talking about getting those outcomes for activating those spaces. I really don't see that letting them through for 2 minutes is going to have that much of an impact on it. And in fact, we'll actually, with this redevelopment, revitalise the space. So, Your Worship, it's clear, I will be voting for your amendment, and I hope that others would consider that too.
As a point of order,
Yep.
Mr. Chair, you just mentioned a very scary word that you're going to put it to the vote. Now,
Yep.
a lot of people have spoken about the main subject, the substantive piece. Now, I'm worried that this vote is going to end it and we're gone. But are you just voting on this deliberation between 1A and 1? No, you're voting that because we haven't had the opportunity.
Slow down. He's done a point of order, so I'll clarify for you. We're only voting on the amendment that I put at this stage.
Just the amendment.
Not on the main options. Just clarifying an amendment to option 1 only.
Okay, no, that's cool. I just need to check.
Thank you. Now we have just one minor, well, not so minor procedural matter, and I've missed in the agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the hearing of the City Block West held on Thursday the 24th of October. Michael's given me the thumbs up, say if I don't pass that first, I'm in trouble. So if somebody would like to move that, Grant and Barry, thank you. Any discussion about those minutes? No, all in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Right, back to the original position, which is I'm putting the vote now, put up by myself and seconded by Tom, that the wording changes for option 1, as we've got it, I'm afraid, and I'm going to do a show of hands. Don't want to record names, but certainly want to be clear on that I'm not just doing it on eyes only. So all those in favour of that amendment, if you could raise your hand. Carried. So now we are back to the issue.
Record my vote against.
Yes,
please.
I can do that. And Ria and Leslie both opposed, and Peter as well. Thank you. Now we come back to the issue of options 1, 2, and 3, and based on Russell's advice, is that option 3 is not really available to us. But again, I mean, we could leave it there unless somebody's desperately needing to vote on it, given it's not available to us. I don't see any procedural issue with that, but I'm open to having that removed if somebody would like to remove it.
Move that we remove it.
Okay, so I've got a seconder with Ria. Anybody like to have some discussions in relation to removing options 3? None? Excellent. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. The final part of this jigsaw puzzle is options 1 and 2, and I'll put option 1. Tom's.
I'll move.
Yep. And Grant seconders, and we'll do it by way of a show of hands so people know exactly. And I'm happy if somebody wants it done by names as well.
Division.
Point of order,
somebody call
Mr.
it
Chair.
division?
I believe that there were some people, including Councillor Pottinger, who wanted to speak.
Correct.
Oh, sorry.
No, we haven't.
And I'm
debated,
indicating I also want to speak.
We were talking about the options for 1.
Sure.
And then some people have used the opportunity to speak.
Okay.
And sneak it in, but
Sure.
I'd like to actually.
Absolutely. I'll open up discussion before we have the vote on options 1 and 2. Rangi.
Oh, okay. Right. Just noting that in the consultation, option 1 actually does say in the consultation document, reconstructed clock tower location gives more prominence to retained heritage buildings. But that's in the consultation. So what I have to say is really in 1989, city's architects along with the council had a vision to put vitality into the city centre. Now, Wagner Place was a bold attempt to achieve this needed vitality and visitor experience. I mean, I actually salute them for this bold step and the decision to make it happen. However, those decisions that drove that creation of Wagner Place and shutting off East Street West were based on the knowledge and information available at the time and what was happening in the city, what was currently happening in the city. Now, 34 years on, this council now has a new 150-room Distinction Hotel as a catalyst to actually revisit the relevance of Wagner Place and the use of East Street West. Now, again, 34 years on, council will be required to make an informed decision, but the landscape has changed dramatically. We now have the City Block, we've got the Langlands Hotel, we got pedestrian vehicle sharing of Lower Esk and Don. We got the HWR Tower. So these are all relevant and influencing our next steps in the way we move forward. Now we've got two options up there. One would have buses deliver visitors to a smart, sheltered hotel entrance, and the second option would have them dumped on the curb in 11th Street. Also, do we want these visitors to have welcoming access to our brand new city I've just talked about, or do we want them navigating a concrete steel barricade that actually would act as the Berlin Wall? Now, what would a city with heart want for such a visitor experience? As it was 34 years ago, this council needs to be bold. So I am, without doubt, going for option 1.
Yep. So, as I said in my email out to you this morning, we are not going to have a across-the-table bouncing of ideas. I'm going to work my way around the table, and you get one chance to say what you need to say on the options 1 and 2. So, Pania. And if you don't want to say anything, you can just default and I'll pass on.
I suppose where I'm sort of like, I mean, I totally agree with what Leslie as well as Rhea has sort of brought to the table, but I suppose I can't understand why it's not being dropped off at the side of the street, 11th Street. There was never no design for an entry or from the developer on what that could look like. I mean, if you're going to enter off 11th Street, you could enter off the side and then continue south. When I look at going through Wagner Place, you're dropping off on East Street and then going around north because there's no way a bus could turn to go south. So it's, yeah, so for me, it's coming back to people first in East Street.
Steve.
I think I mentioned in a previous workshop that I was struggling with this decision as one of my first big ones. And so I've talked to a lot of people and I appreciate everyone that submitted. I think that's a great part of our process. But I've just also been really excited about the opportunity in front of us to be bold and connect our city and welcome these tourists into our city in a meaningful way, but also provide something really special for our community. And I think Councillor Campbell and Crackett really summed up my excitement for this opportunity, and it's a really great compromise that shows I think we've listened to our community in the submission process. So I'm excited about option 1.
Thank you. Darren, given that you sit right opposite.
I am supporting option 1, and in doing so, recognising the significant changes that have gone on in the city over an even longer period of time than 34 years. I think one of the things that Councillor Pottinger didn't mention was the fact that the internet has arrived since then, and that's had a marked change on our community and how we do business and how we associate, and also made a significant change in placemaking. And that's at the heart of what a lot of the passion around Wapna Place has been. And I think some of the multi-use spaces that have been developed elsewhere, recognising a few of the climactic challenges that come with that part of town, will allow for a nominal incursion of the occasional vehicle, but still leave a space where people have precedence, as they do in Esk Street. Actually, when you cross the road, car has to stop. And actually, it's been like that for a long time, despite a few drivers not noticing the sign that they went past. I think it's important that we do pause to look at some of the other issues around the columns, but the retention of the clock tower is something that people have spoken passionately about, and I think there will be a slightly different civic space, or no, public space. I think a civic space is something else we have to address at some other point. But the prominence of this on State Highway 6 is not insignificant. But I don't see it as a loss of the current amenity as much as an amendment to what it is.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for the second bite at the cherry, but as Councillor Pottinger rightfully put out, I've already sort of said my piece before I probably should have.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yep. Evelyn?
So technically I have spoken before as well, but however I was advised by your email that when it came to this part of the thing that Manawhina would have the right to speak. So I want to go back to the fact that this, and as I mentioned in a workshop, is possibly the closest space we have to where the original Waka landing space was, and where in the beginnings of this as a city, the sailing ships came. So the connection between Wapna Place and the railway station, that arrival and departure space, is actually a connection that is, I think, quite important. When I've been considering this, and I've been looking at the all the historical connections, and particularly the role of the Wapnas in this thing, there was something I was unaware of. I spoke last night to a 92-year-old who told me about Mr. Wapna and his role as mayor being there at the departure of every troop train and the arrival home of every soldier during World War II, not in his official capacity, just as in his capacity as a caring human being, something that was quite well known at the time. Now, to my shame, I did not know that, although I have spoken about his generosity and his philanthropy. This space is not the space that Mrs. Wapna invested in. This space is not going to be the space that the citizens invested in 1988, 1989. This is going to take away some of the opportunities that they have had, and we are not yet offering them something to replace that. So whilst I recognise that the majority will probably go to the vision of tourists and buses and the development of a hotel facility, I really want to remind people that buses can come and go and tourists may come and go, but the people of this place are the people who came here, whether they came here 1,000 years ago, 200 years ago, 80 years ago, or in the case of the very new staff member 6 weeks ago, the person who presented earlier today. We continue to welcome people, but who are the people who choose to stay, and where is their place in this conversation? So I would like to implore you all to think about the people who have chosen to stay and invest in this place, and keep Wapna Place as a place that is connected to the city and is intrinsically the heart of our city.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So I've spoken before, but as I spoke against the amendment, I'm taking the chance to speak now on the substantive issue. Yes, it was a brave move to establish Wapna Place in 1989, and many things have changed since that time. And I would just like to remind people that another of the things that has changed is the attitude of all councils towards pedestrianised spaces. We don't have to build our cities around vehicles, tour buses or any other vehicles any longer, and most councils now recognise that. So I would just remind people that the decisions of this council are not ruled by what is best for tour buses or indeed any vehicular traffic. The decisions of this council, in my view, are around what is best for the ratepayers and residents of Invercargill, and if part of enhancing that is to support our tourism industry, that is good. But overall, I am guided by what I believe is best for the ratepayers and residents of Invercargill, and what they have given me to understand is what they wish. At the moment, as far as I am concerned, Wapna Place was quintessentially a place for people to go, to enjoy, to have protests at, to sit and enjoy food trucks or whatever entertainment might be on, to make use of the stage, to be there because you're on the way to the library and it's a good place to sit and check that your library books were the ones you meant to choose, to be there with your kids, to use the very good toileting and other facilities we have established there, to go to the restaurants. It was a place for people to go for many reasons, which people have told us they value as residents and ratepayers of the city of Invercargill. I believe on that basis alone that the only option I can vote for is option 2, and that is what I intend to do. The people first connection to the city centre and the heart of Invercargill, I believe, is still in Wapna Place. We have not offered an alternative. If we take away Wapna Place and say vehicles can go through Wapna Place and it will not be 3 or 4 buses a day for a couple of minutes, it will be more than that, because once we open it to vehicles, other vehicles will pressure to go through. We have not suggested in this taking away of the essence of Wapna Place that we have an alternative as a council that we are offering. We have not said we are creating or have another heart to replace the Wapna Place we are taking away. Until we do that, option 2 is what I shall vote for. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. Look, we must listen to the people, 86%. And what I hear, we're not, most of us around here, some of us are not taking any notice of that. Look, why would you open up a very dangerous wind tunnel area? The ones that remember what it was like, was the most dangerous place in Invercargill City until Wapna Place was built. Why would you open up that? It was so bad it was blowing people over. And the wind still comes predominantly from the west. I explained it yesterday. I won't explain it again today. But it's only for 1 bus a day. Why would you open up a dangerous wind tunnel for 1 bus today? Maybe no buses tomorrow, 2 buses the next day. Then there may be 3 or 4 days with no buses. Look, the gifted land that the Wapna family gave to Invercargill, they'd be horrified now. And so will their relations and friends. It served as a purpose by blocking that wind out. And as I explained yesterday, it blocks a lot of that wind going up to Esk Street. You're going to open that up, we're going to have problems on our hands. What's going to happen in, say, a few years' time? That land that Mr. Costello gifted the city, the man from Ototara. Someone may come up with a brilliant idea. Oh, we'll do something else. We've got Mr. Costello's money. Goodbye. Look, what message are we sending to the public? I was talking to a group of elderly people just last Thursday. When I say elderly, in their 80s and 90s. And one fella told me him and his wife were thinking of when they go to leave a bit of money to the city council to put for a very good cause or use. He said, what some of those councils are thinking about now is put them off completely. So what message are we sending out there? Look, no buses for me, thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, I support option 1. I don't believe there's going to be a lot of vehicles go through that, and we can, if we stay with their buses, the tour buses, then we can stop other vehicles from going through there. Yeah, that's my preference anyway. I'm happy enough that we're leaving the clock there. So we've compromised there, and yeah, that's my opinion of it.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
I'm going to add a little bit to Evelyn's story. I'm quite passionate about history and heritage as well, and I've been speaking to people about this thing too. And one thing I found out, I don't know whether anybody else in this room knows this, I never knew it, but Mabel Walkner actually had to buy the land to donate it to the city. It wasn't owned by Walkner. And I was actually talking to the person who sold it to her, right, all those years ago. And Mabel Walkner's vision was for a green space in the centre of the city. It was not for what was actually built. What she wanted to build was a little park, actually, in that space. And I think, you know, there was some disappointment about the fact that it ended up a bit of a concrete jungle. I think there is an opportunity through what we're talking about to revitalise and refurbish that area. I think it will be better as a consequence of what we're talking about. At the moment, it was built 39 years ago, however long ago it was, and it looks as though it's never been touched since. It's a rusting, relatively, you know, is in very poor condition, and it badly needs refurbished, including the clock. I think 5 years down the track, if there are buses that cross there, and I'm sure, as Barry said, there's ways that we can stop other vehicles. If there are buses crossing there for 5 minutes a day, as Alex said, then 5 years from now we'll wonder what the fuss was about, to be honest. I think we can make Walkner Place a better tribute to Abraham Walkner than it is today by refurbishing it.
Thank you, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I suggest to Peter, if as good sir would like to donate some money, then maybe the museum's a good cause. Just with respect to the consultation, I thought that was a very valuable process, and sort of dissected not only the submissions but equally the people I've spoken to, and what's come through is the rich history in this area, and even as Evelyn's pointed out, you know, the first landing site. So what better way to welcome people to our city than in a place like that? It's just about how we tell that story. Came through very strongly a bit around the clock, and I think with what we've got in option 1, which I'll be voting for, we can look to retain that, and I think that adds to that. But equally, the other point I think we need to think about is economic development. You know, I've got family that are returning from university, and they're struggling to get jobs over the holidays. We've lost 200 jobs in the city because of H&Js, and here's an opportunity that's probably going to employ 100 odd people, and some of those will be temporary and part-time, and it's about economic development, and we've got to find a balance. And you know, those people that work in that hotel, they will be either tenants of landlords, or they will be house owners and will be ratepayers, and we need to focus and provide opportunity and look to partner with the hotel in this investment in a way that there's a level of compromise, and I think option 1 provides that, and that's the way I'll be voting.
Thank you, Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, a lot of people have already said the to's and the fro's and the cons, but what I wanted to let us be mindful of is that we're told that our history dictates what our future looks like, and that the future and what that looks like for tomorrow, I feel that this council particularly is forgetting that in what we're choosing to allocate in terms of buses. I'm very strong in listening to those submitters when they said that they require us to have a pedestrian only area. I still support that. Whilst I'll get the economic value of what this can bring to our city, I'd like us to find a more even ability to do that without taking away what the people of this city have told us I understand too and support what Tom has said, that the Mabel Watner did purchase that land and had a completely different space, but I do believe that we do still have the potential in option 2 to beautify Watner Place and to make it more greener. I don't think that we haven't gotten into the design yet of that. I can't support option 1 on the basis of the various submitters and what they brought to this table and the passion and history that they brought to us. I cannot and will not ignore that.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
I didn't have a hand up. Just want to talk to me.
Down around the table. Sorry to.
Bearing in mind that we aren't going to open it up completely, then I will be supportive of for option 1. I think I agree with Grant. I mean, we've got to look at the economic side of things. People are prepared to put this sort of investment into our community. I mean, we should be doing things to assist. Also, bearing in mind what Ian was saying before, when you look at Invercargill 34 years ago, I haven't done my sums, that's 34 years ago, I think he said, there wasn't much happening down below there, but there is now. But you've got the old railway hotel, you've got the railway station itself, which as we all know is a historic building, even though it was built in 1975. And then now you're going to have a 150-person hotel, which is the biggest accommodation provider in Invercargill, without a doubt, possibly the Ascot, maybe bigger. But so to me, it's a wee bit of a no-brainer. I'd like to see S Street continued, personally. The way we have S Street at the moment, some of us walked through there before, and I think we might have been on the street for 10 minutes, we've seen 2 cars. So to me, it's working perfectly as a pedestrian precinct with car access available. I'd be quite happy to see the speed limit lowered on that bit of S Street as well, just to reduce cars even more possibly. But if Lower S Street would look something similar to that, carry that same concept through, I think I'd be very happy, because then to me it marries it up. I mean, you got State Highway 6 going through the middle, but at the end of the day, State Highway 6 is really just the main street of Invercargill. You know, I don't think people, I mean, you go that way to Riverton or to Queenstown, but it's just the main street of Invercargill. So the fact that you've got that in the middle of 2 nice bits doesn't matter. I'm happy to leave the columns here. I think the columns should be retained if they can be. It's a great sort of thing to make the pedestrian crossing look safer. And if I had my way, I'd probably have access in 2 directions through Lower S Street, but at that much reduced speed. Probably keep it for buses only. But in saying that, you know, with the compromise of the clock, I'm happy to have the clock, but I would have been happy to move the clock as well. But it should be retained, maintained. So if it stays there and you've got access there, it probably sort of meets what I sort of see as the vision to continue the prosperity and growth of Invercargill. Because I mean, to be honest, the face of Invercargill has changed in the last 5 years dramatically, and I'd like to see that continue. Thank you.
I'd just like to note that this is the first time ever you've talked about reducing a speed limit.
Yes.
That is correct, but on this occasion, I think it's sort of suitable. Yeah,
we'll note that. Trish.
I am for option 1, and I'd like to just mention 2 things. There's been a lot of talk about Mabel Watner and what she's done and what she's given the city, and there's no question that she has or what she offered. The plaque that's in Watner Place talks about Abraham Watner. It doesn't mention Mabel Watner. So obviously, in the past, the councillors didn't get that right. I'm not saying they should have, but we just need to remember that. We're trying to do something that's smart, and we need to try and move forward. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership from the Mayor in listening to the submitters and bringing this amended number 1. I think we've come to an excellent compromise. We listened. We may have to make changes or not, but at the moment, we're doing the best that we can given what we put out.
Okay, I'm the last one to comment on it. As you probably know, I was keen and supportive of option 1 before it was amended. So I would have just taken the whole lot out and just had a one-way street through, similar to what we've got in Air Street. But I will bow to the interim amended one, because I think that's a compromise that satisfies the community. I'm not sure I agree with cities going towards pedestrian. What I see around, certainly in places like Taupo and our nearest neighbour, which is Queenstown, have gone away from pedestrian only to shared spaces. So shared spaces means a predominance of pedestrian traffic, but with very slow vehicle traffic coming through, very slow. And I think that works well in both Queenstown and in Taupo, where I've looked as well. So I'll be supporting option 1. So Tom's moved 1, Grant. So do we want it on a show of hands, or does anybody want it recorded, which way the votes are going, which is a division? No call for a division, okay, just purely on a show of hands. All those in favour of option 1? 1, 2, 3, 4. Are you up, Rhea? No, you're still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 10-3. Thank you for your participation.
Please record.
Recorded against.
Record mine too, please.
Yeah, three opposed, or wish to have them recorded against. Russell, for you and for John. Just a little bit of side comment for me. It gives you the green light to get on with the infrastructure. Great if you could come back with some plans that might scope for us how that looks with the traffic going through, being mindful that one of the issues we have is that heritage building that has the veranda over the top, and how I understand we have plenty of time to get a consent through to have that removed. In fact, it's questionable whether it was actually part of the original design anyway. And on a personal level, if we could tidy up the clock, be it painted in a very neutral colour that doesn't make it too predominant, given that we want people to look past the clock, certainly from the backside, and maybe some uplighting at night time would be really neat. What's that? Oh, okay. Yep. So we've also got some recommendations on 9, is it 9? 9, 10 and 11. Oh, sorry, 12. You have to move it for me. And 12, so we've got 3 more recommendations in here. Somebody like to move?
I'll move those.
Alex, thank you. And Darren, any discussion about those 3 options? Those 3 recommendations? No, absolutely none. All those in favour? Carried.
Sorry.
Oh,
we had
sorry.
Just a point of clarification.
Sure.
In the discussion about the port cochere,
Yep.
that is going to intrude onto what is technically the road space. Is that correct?
That I can't answer. Yes,
That is correct.
I've got people at the back of the room.
So,
yes.
yep. So in that respect, then that is also where we need to be mindful that that should not be an impact upon the ratepayers. That should be an impact upon the developer.
Yeah, look,
it's an encroachment on our public space.
Yes, I won't draw into that at this stage. I don't think, I've heard nothing from the developer that would indicate that the ratepayers are paying for any of the potential infrastructure impacts around the building itself. Russell, can you help me with that?
Mr Mayor, the porter will have a licence to occupy, which would include the cost of the development will be with the developer.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, we've got these to work through now. Okay, item 6 on the. How come we've got different numbers? Different numbers. Okay, so we've got item 5 on the agenda, which is the 2024-54 30-year draft infrastructure strategy. This is your area, Rangi.
Yep. Sorry, it just went offline. Computer. So the infrastructure strategy, I mean, I've read through it, and the alarming bit to me, and I've raised this with Michael, is the money we're putting aside for the consents for the 2 wastewater discharges.
Yep.
And one's in 2025, one's in 2029.
Yep.
Now, there's a big figure there, $90 million. Now, what I just need some clarity around is that the money set aside for the worst case scenario, where we don't get consent for what we're currently doing, and these are Plan B, C, and D coming into it, or is it just a bit of a? Is this if we do get consent? I just need.
So I can help you with that. So the previous government suggested to us, well, DIA did on behalf of central government, that councils need to be aware that in the future, going forward on these consents, that iwi would oppose any land to, I guess right, water to water discharge. So you wouldn't be able to put it into a river or out to sea. That the preference was for discharge to land, and that councils would need to find land. Well, now some have already done this, as you'll be aware. Some have not. So the consents have not come up. What I've asked the central government, which is very new, so I don't have an answer yet, as you can imagine, is do they continue to have that position that we should be going down that track? And there is a dollar cost, as you can see, or whether or not a council should challenge that if the consent doesn't go their own way, and would there be government support to, I guess, put a line in the sand about whether we can go water to water, which we currently do, or whether we go water to land, which is what the future of it. So I don't have an answer back on that, but they have said that they will look at that.
No, I would agree with you there, because when you are talking that amount of money, huge amount of money, then if the consent is not granted, then perhaps litigation is an option, considering what's at stake.
Sure.
And it's all based around our coastal plan and everything, and also the quality of the water we would be discharging. So if we got it to a point that it was drinkable, but it was still objected because of the cultural significance, then, you know, and you look at the impact on ratepayers of rates going up potentially a third, you know, you've got to have, there's got to be some reasonable grounds there for, but it just, what worries me is that it's all in the air, and we're just sitting there waiting for this thing to come along, and it's a bit scary.
So having appointed a Minister for Internal Affairs, as you can imagine, that won't be too far away. I've spoken to Penny about this, and to Simon, who is potentially a minister in this position, and flagged that with them. By the time we get to the Clifton consent, the overall cost will be somewhere around about 120 million, and that's very conservative, given inflation galloping away for the next few years. But we just don't have an answer to it. Yeah. Well, I guess we've got to work on the, Russell's going to say something here. I guess we're going to have to work on the assumption that we default to not being able to get our consent the way it is at the moment. Or signal that anyway. Russell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. What the infrastructure strategy looks to do is to actually put a 30-year horizon and bring the information from the asset plans to, I guess, give them some connection and direction. It also links to the financial strategy. So within the infrastructure strategy, the options that we've listed are all there, but to actually also then develop and inform the long-term plan, we have to bring what the, I guess, best understanding from the technical team brings to the table to predict for the next 10 years. And they're the options that are brought forward and are in the draft budget for the LTP. So all the options are there, that list. But once again, by 2029, some of those, I guess, will need to be worked through the range of options with iwi, where we go, and that consenting is actually a longer term process, which will be quite detailed and quite technical along the way. But what we're trying to show within the strategy is what the most probable outcomes could be with what we know at the moment. Now that could change over the next few years, and accordingly the asset plans and the infrastructure strategy will need to be revisited in due course.
So I guess two things with that, Russell. Again, just having some overarching discussions with the National Party, pre-election and post-election is, I think, two issues. I think there will be a whole lot of consents will go through the process long before we need to, certainly with Clifton. So we'll have an understanding where the land lies. And the other issue, I guess, is the issue of the overall three waters impact. And so National have previously said they're going to rescind the legislation, but they will not rescind the water quality nor the regulator legislation. So that'll still be there. And I think when I've asked what does that mean for us going forward, it means that we'll probably have to put in an annual Three Waters plan to show them what we're doing, heading towards this big amount of money at 30 years from now. And I know that many councils will not be able to afford that. It'll just be totally unaffordable. And so they are considering some things like a sort of contestable fund that they may drive out of taxes, which allows some councils to bid for money to help them with that exercise of getting the Three Waters sorted. So that creates a landscape that we're not sure about.
And there certainly are some challenges ahead for this council and many others. But I guess that's what the infrastructural strategy looks to document and highlight for that horizon.
Okay, Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. You may have partially answered this, but I thought I'd better check. When you and Councillor Pottinger spoke, were you implying that you might suggest the Invercargill City Council as the test case?
No, definitely not. No.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because members of the public could very well have been left with the impression that that's what you had just suggested, and I did want that clarification.
When I spoke to national members of Parliament, and some from ACT as well, I said they may want to take on the issue if they don't want to help a council go through the process that wants to retain water-to-water discharge. It wouldn't be us, we're too far down the track. But it could be some other council, and I just suggest to them, if you're going to do that, there could be quite a legal cost for that council that they might want to assist with, just to clarify for all councils where the Environment Court or wherever it lands determines it to be.
Just wanted that clarification to be out in the public.
Definitely not our council. No, not at all.
Thank you.
Tom.
It's not on that specific subject, but on the infrastructure strategy itself, it seems to me that there's a couple of, what I think are really important principles that I look at page 99 of board books. The paragraph that starts number 3. Non-critical assets will be allowed to operate to their expected lives and or beyond, recognising that some limited failures in these assets may occur before renewal. And then over the page, paragraph 6, we will use risk analysis, business cases and other advanced modelling techniques to develop, and it goes on. And the point I want to make is that is exactly how modern asset management works. It should be, replacement should be done in condition monitoring or in non-critical items, let them run to failure. And I don't know how much a change it is in this strategy, or whether it's always been the way you've treated it.
That continues to be our focus, and I guess as we get greater asset maturity, more information, and our systems grow over time, so our knowledge and our ability to deliver that. I guess the challenge will always be is where is that point where you're supposed to react, or where do you wait? And that is where the criticality is becoming a much more, I guess, focus point for our teams to be able to pick that and know what's important.
Yeah, and Sri, again, Chair, I mean, what I wanted to ask, and it's probably more for the next paper and Patricia than for you, but if you take that kind of approach to asset management, where you accept that if something's 95 years old, then you don't necessarily have to replace it just because the manufacturer said it should be replaced at 100 years old. It's going to last longer than 95 years. If you take that kind of approach to the asset management operating strategy, I would argue you should try to take that approach to depreciation. A more actuarial approach to depreciation, where you recognise that something might be installed with a 20-year life, but by the time you get to the 18th or 19th year, it's not going to fail in the 20th year. It's almost certain it's going to last longer than that. So, I mean, that's how, and I will talk to it when, Patricia does her paper, but I mean, it's how, insurance companies think about us. When you're born, if you were born in 1952 when I was born, 1950 when I was born, then
Anybody
your
over
average
48?
yeah, your average expected life was 76. But if you get to my current age, then your average expected life is 86 or 76, because they adjust as you get older, because you're a survivor population. You never died at cot death. You weren't involved in a war. You never got a car crash. And you know, my argument would be that we should think about taking an approach to depreciation as well. As assets age, it becomes a curve rather than a straight line, and that might be, you know, a way that we can mirror in our financial model exactly what we're doing in our asset management model, which is that we don't automatically assume in the 100th year for a 100-year pipe you're going to replace that pipe. So anyway, so I kind of mixed the two things up there. But the fundamental question I wanted to ask was whether it was a new approach. And I think from what you've said, Russell, it's not completely new, but it's a direction of travel.
That's correct. And we do, as a pipe gets to the end of its life, revisit that and effectively continue to extend that and revisit that pipe's age more frequently. One of the things that we're seeing in the infrastructural world is that our pipes, we're only the first life cycle of a pipe, and often the better deterioration curves and those sorts of modelling are often things where assets have had like a 20-year life, and there've been several cycles over the time, so you can much more reliably predict. But because we're a relatively new country and we've only had one cycle of our pipelines, we are still in that learning phase, and you will have seen over time with our council, some of our water pipes, we've had varying age over the last, I guess, 15 years or so, where we've had short lives, longer lives, shorter lives, and as more of the industry across the whole country learns about what that is for AC pipes and PVC pipes and those things, as we learn more, it's being applied to our data on the refresh cycle of the revaluation of every 3 years. So that's one of the first things we look at and saying is, can we push the life out even further? And I guess predominantly to say, well, if it's going to last another 10 years, well, it is going to last another 10 years. What's the risk? And that strategy that's in there really just says, let's make sure we understand which are the critical pipes, and let's not let them fall over, because I don't think we want to appear like Wellington. But if we get pipes that have problems in a street, it may well be that you may say 2 or 3 bursts before we actually react to that pipe as a renewal.
So just as a reflection, Russell, I guess from my end, end of life has a different terminology depending on who you talk to. So I sometimes hear people say, well, it's got to the end of its life because it's 75 years, when in fact it could be very well 100 years, but end of life just means that's when we're going to replace it. So that's one issue. The other issue, I just wanted to reinforce what you said about a lot of it's depending on where the pipes go, because some pipes are far more important than others. And I've heard the discussion before from staff around renewals, having regular renewals, which in some ways means regular work for a contractor or contractors. And if you start dropping it off and kicking the ball down the track a little bit and taking a bit of risk, are you getting yourself into a bit of a hole when you need those contractors again because they've got a drop off of work?
I guess there's a couple of things in there. The first one is we talk about remaining useful life rather than end of life. So I guess that's a different focus on it. It's not actually when do you predict, it's how much do you think you've got left, which is actually probably a better way to think, you know, what have you got left. In terms of the market and actually renewals, that's actually us having a longer term, I guess, planned future for what we think we're going to do work, so the contractors can gear themselves up. If we think we can suddenly go from a spend 1 year and double it the next year and the whole industry respond and do it, depends on the scale of the work. But if we're doubling, if we're going from a $20 million construction industry in terms of pipe networks to $40 million, it takes some time for them to scale up and gear up to make sure you actually get value for money, because I guess that's the balance. So the industry is quite difficult because it is a bit of a challenge. There's lots of, and we suffer a little bit from a smaller market, but it's also they're looking at where the profitability, what's the easiest sort of work to do. Another some other industries have less risk than doing pipe networks. We have some quite easy ground to dig up, and then there's some other ground that's really difficult. So it depends on where you are, what you're doing, and which year, will depend on how interested the contractors are. But it is the long-term prediction of what we anticipate our future workloads is really key to that market gearing up and being able to deliver and be competitive, because that's the piece we want to make sure we're getting value for money.
So what I was suggesting wasn't that you increase the contractor's work, given what Tom said about the curve as opposed to the straight line. We might in the initial phase actually decrease their work, and if you did that, which has some benefits for us, by kicking depreciation out and then doing less work, you then have a trouble that when you want to get more work done, it's harder to entice them back into the industry.
As long as we have a long enough signal about where that increase is going to occur, then your industry has an opportunity to respond.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. A grant.
Yeah, it's more of a comment than anything else. I think this paper and the next one really crystallised the challenge that's in front of us, and indeed all councils, and I think it's great that we've got it called out really clearly. So, you know, thanks to the staff for putting it together in a pretty succinct way, but it shouldn't be lost on us as councillors around what the challenge is within this paper and the next one in terms of finance, and somehow we've got to work it out. As the discussion's just been had around, it will be around partnership with council, with local contractors, but equally I think there's a really important part for the new government to play in this, and you know, we need to make the case very strongly for their partnership with us in this, because it can't just fall to ratepayers, in my view.
And you're quite right. If you look at examples recently of Queenstown, they've got to their lending cap. They can't afford any more work, I don't think, renewal type work. They're just struggling with it. I mean, while we think we've got issues, we're probably in one of the better positions compared to a lot of other councils, but it's still, we've got to be cognizant of it. Evelyn.
Yes, just through you, to Russell, just you've referred to in here to alternative water supply, but the corollary to that is the water quality that water supply might bring, but also being the recognition of some of the issues that other councils have had, for example, Queenstown with illness, waterborne illness and things like that. How are we going to be placed going forward in that place? Because that's not really referred to here. I know Taumata Arawai are going to keep us up to speed on that, but are we investing in improving our water quality treatment type things as new things are being discovered and as new concerns are being raised?
So certainly our current water supply is compliant, which is a huge advantage, and certainly the alternative water supply brings, I guess, that second part over the next period to actually give us some opportunity, give us some, I guess, some backdrop against should an event occur that our primary supply isn't available to us, and that supply will also have treatment that will actually meet the requirements. So that would actually help us quite a lot. Should an event occur somewhere on our network that would limit the current supply, because having a sole source of water at the moment has that, I guess, that increased risk profile that's the only place we get water from at the moment. And should an event occur, whatever it might be, that would actually make that a problem, then we wouldn't have a water supply. So the alternative is actually the piece that we can inject appropriately treated water, compliant, back into the network and be able to deliver that. Gives us extra capacity to deliver for other things, but it does mean that you've got a more secure, more robust water supply that's resilient against, I guess, troubles that might occur that we haven't necessarily foreseen.
And we're keeping on investing in upgrading our treatment processes.
And that's the requirement that we have to continue to meet, and that's,
thank you.
We are fortunate in that situation to be in the current position we are.
Okay, any other discussion on that? No, none. Would somebody like to move the two recommendations we have? Rangi, thank you.
I'll move that.
Re-up, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. Next issue is the, welcome Patricia, the long-term Financial strategy. Let it be noted that Andrew doesn't have his cell phone up to his ear. You want to take the paper as read?
Take the papers read. The couple of things I wanted to add is the financial strategy sits and interlinks with the infrastructure strategy, and that forms the umbrella and is one of the core functional pieces that we need for the LTP. But it also provides the guidelines or the guardrails for each of the activities plans that you've set up. It doesn't say what we'll provide, it says how we will fund whatever the activity plans and asset management plans say we are going to provide to the community. So it is in a draft state because, as we all know, as soon as I put a number in there in relation to inflation or anything like that, it will change. So it stays in a draft state right through to June, but we will go out and consult on a number of pieces in it, and they've all slipped my mind at the moment, Rhiannon.
The whole document will be available for consultation, but we will speak to the specific items that are significant for this financial strategy, and those are summarised in the report on page page 113 of Board Book summarises the main changes for this financial strategy. And all of those will be familiar to yourselves, councillors, because we've been talking about them across the past year.
The focus in the strategy has been on the challenges. So as alluded to in the infrastructure strategy, depreciation and funding of renewals and our capital program is one of the challenges, as is inflation, as is a lack of revenue.
Questions, anybody? While Tom gets his act together, I'll ask the question he was going to ask before, which was if we have an infrastructure strategy that doesn't have a straight line but more of a curve based on useful end of life or whatever Russell said it was, how does that change the way we deal with depreciation?
So the depreciation and how we're modelling it is similar. We actually expect that assets will have an extended life, and we actually factor that in, but the difference with depreciation is it's the cost to replace an asset. So if we put a pipe in the ground today and it might cost us $100, the time we come to replace it in maybe 50, 60 years, we start depreciating to replace it in 50, 60. Inflation will expand that, so depreciation needs to keep up with both inflation and extra life. So it's not uncommon for the lives of assets as we calculate depreciation to keep going out. If we were to start to get actuarial on it, we might need a bigger finance team, or the actuaries becomes much more complicated than what it probably needs to be. But we do know that actually depreciation will have some catch-ups along the way through that revaluation cycle, because we have to effectively at the moment through the strategy work out how we bring back and catch up that $215 million increase that we had in the value of an infrastructure network at June 22 when we did the revaluation, because that's saying now if we had to replace our networks today, the whole lot, it would cost us $215 million more than what we had thought at that time. So that's where we have to bring that back over time, and that's where the strategy is sort of looking at how we would bring that back over the period of the 10 years.
Okay, any further questions?
Yes.
Tom?
So, I mean, this will come back to the same point, but if we look historically, and if you look at even going forward, although we depreciate at, let's say, X, we actually have only completed engineering works at sort of 70 or 80% of X historically, and going forward, we're predicting it's going to be kind of 80 or 90% of X. So we don't actually do work at the rate of depreciation, and despite that, we don't see bus pipes all over the place. And the reason for that is because, in my view, we depreciate at a faster rate than we need to. That would be my view. So if you straight line depreciate, if you take an asset which has got when you buy it, on the nameplate it says it lasts 20 years. That's equivalent to the example I gave before, that when a baby's born, it might have an expected life of 76 years. But by the time, on an actuarial basis, by the time that baby gets into middle age, in fact, on an actuarial basis, its predicted life is not 76, its predicted life is 80 or 85 or 100 or whatever. And it's just, use the word actuarial, it's just statistics. Statistically, if it survives that long, it's going to last beyond its life. And I would argue the reason that we managed to get away with, let's use that word, not investing at the rate of depreciation in terms of replacements, and yet we don't see bus pipes all over the place, is for that very reason. They actually last longer than it says on the nameplate. If they'd survived the first few years, they last longer than it says in the nameplate. So my question, again, and it's a difficult question to answer straight off the bat, but if we did take allowing for the fact you might need 50 accountants to do it, but if you did take an actuarial approach to depreciation as an asset ages, would that, well, logically it should actually reduce depreciation. And a giant problem we've got going forward is to try to match depreciation, which is leapt up because the overall value assets has leapt up. And in my view, we're wearing a giant hair shirt by just straight lining depreciation for those assets. So I don't really expect an answer. I mean, it's a kind of challenge to think about it.
Sure. And I guess the other challenge, I guess, is what will the audit response be to that change? I'm not saying we should shy away because of that. We might want to consider that as well.
So the financial strategy actually deals with that in page 120 of board books. So where we do look at the statistical deviations about if an asset says it's to have a 50-year life, we could be within one or two statistical deviations of that. So we could be 15 years early, or we could be 15 years later. And I'm sure Russell was up here with us. Remember a point of time a number of years ago where we had failure of a certain lot of pipes that were much newer than 50 years.
Yeah.
And then that balances out where they were being replaced and they wouldn't have been fully depreciated. We wouldn't have recovered the depreciation. So it does go both ways.
Michael.
Yeah, through yourself. Yeah, this is actually a lot more difficult than do you fund depreciation or renewals, because you need to look at it from a network perspective. And I think Russell in the infrastructure discussion highlighted some of the nuances. We're in a first cycle in relation to infrastructure as a country, so we don't necessarily have enough data yet in relation to the infrastructure. But it's never going to match in relation to your depreciation renewals, which is a challenge we have with the auditors. And the reason it will never match is because you start depreciating from year one. You don't replace your network in year one. You replace it down the track. And we're in that first cycle of replacement. So there was very little infrastructure replaced in those first 50 years of ownership of assets. But we were still trying to put a portion of rating in there to actually allow for that, 50 to 100 years ago, it should have been. We're now in a state we're trying to get back to funding depreciation that won't match our renewals. Our renewals need to match what the infrastructure strategy is indicating we need to replace. Our funding should match our long-run depreciation. So we're funding and rating the right people for the right thing. So we're funding the next generation for the assets we're going to be replacing, not necessarily funding the replacement of today's assets. And that's the challenge, is getting the balance right between what you're rating for and what you're replacing. They won't match, so we should know that. We use it as a proxy because it's a network to check it, but we also know that they won't match, but they should be within QE. What we've got the issue is not only are we in the first cycle, we're also now, the whole infrastructure was put in one generation component. We're now coming through to that whole infrastructure as a country coming due all at the same time. So the ability to spend is just not there because there's not the capacity to do it. That was the affordable water component. The funding component is slightly separate, but the reality is we can't actually do the investment in the scale that we need to be doing to replace it. That goes back to the infrastructure strategy. The funding issues actually come back to our strategy as a country probably over the previous 50 years, not the strategies we're currently trying to do, which is we've learnt over the years and we're starting to get our strategies right going forward. I think we've still got a lot of lessons to learn going forward. As a council, we made a call in relation to the replacement and depreciation, and in the last cycle, we're now in the catch up to the strategy, and indicating in the strategy is trying to get back to fund the right people for the right assets, try and fund the future ratepayers for the replacement of those assets going forward. We're not quite at that cycle yet. It is very complicated, and it's because you've got a massive network. And I think of it from a country perspective, this problem is not unique to Invercargill, it's every council that's got the same problem.
Some much worse than us. Any other questions? Somebody like to move the two recommendations? Oh, sorry, Grant.
I haven't got a question, I've actually got a solution.
Excellent.
For the country. We need an ACC for infrastructure.
Yep.
If you think about the model that works in ACC and how it funds, we actually need that for infrastructure. So there you go, take that to national.
So, just out of curiosity, I have.
When you think about it, though, what
you're right.
It could be
It's not a flippant
and
discussion.
If we'd have done that 30 or 40 years ago, we wouldn't be in the position.
Yep. I have suggested again to the incoming government that, I hate centralisation, that one of the things they could centralise into a Ministry of Infrastructure would be 3 waters, roading, which we don't have the right formula for at the moment, emergency management, Southland, emergency management, and telecommunications for emergencies. Those 4 could be and should be funded by taxes, which means our taxes would go up, but our rates would drop accordingly. And there is some desire to be looking at that, because 2 of those areas, 3 waters and roading, are in serious need of help and can't be done through rates. Any other questions? No? Would somebody like to move those 2 recommendations? Geez, you got to sleep there, Darren. Alex and Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. And the last one is the issue of, mix it up, the levels of services, KPIs and targets. Again, Rhiannon?
So again, Mayor, I'll take this report as read. You have seen through all of the presentations from the activity and asset managers their proposed performance targets. There is quite a structured legal framework that these all need to fit within in terms of the Local Government Act and the accounting standards that we need to comply with as well. I'll just draw your attention to one proposed change in the way that we group the activities. That's for the purposes of reporting and easing communication with the public. The general services activity, which covers all our non-core services, is quite large, so therefore proposing splitting it for this long-term plan into 2 groups. Those 2 proposed groups are the Leisure, Recreation and Wellbeing Services Group and the Corporate and Regulatory Services Group. It doesn't have any impact on the way council delivers its activities. It just talks about how it just impacts rather how we talk about those activities. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yep. So I've got one for you, Rhiannon. we get regular reports about KPIs and service level targets that generally show that we achieve about 74% when you look at the cluster. We regularly seem to be about a quarter under. Now, I know there's probably reasons for each one, but one of the things that it raises with me is, are we setting aspirational targets that we actually don't achieve, or are we sitting underneath regulatory targets which we have to comply with? I'm not asking you to respond to that today, but just
I
to
can
give some
respond,
thought
Mayor,
to that
if you
going
want.
forward.
Yes. So it's both essentially. There are some DIA set targets that we cannot change, and just one missed event in regulatory or in some of the stormwater services, for example, means that whole level of service is missed. And there's nothing that we can do about that as a council. Alternatively, in some areas, we are suggesting a revision of some targets to bring them into a more realistic range. So, for example, the democratic process satisfaction target, we knew that when we went to an online survey, we were going to see some changes as a result of methodology. We're also seeing national trends in terms of reduced satisfaction right across the country with how people are feeling in terms of their opportunities to engage with the democratic process. Therefore, still a stretch target, but a reduced target is suggested. But you'll see there are targets there for each KPI, and all of those are in most cases either maintained or increasing, so that we've got that step pathway towards improvement.
Yeah, I just wonder sometimes about the staff impact of having an aspirational target that in some ways is not achievable. So, for argument's sake, we want 100% of something and we get 98%, you should be patting somebody on the back for that. But we tend to, it's a negative result. So, any work that happens in that area would be great, I think. Ria.
Thank you. Pretty much similar to your question, Mr. Mayor. So that's been answered. This is really good because it's given me an opportunity to go through and actually understand a lot more areas than I had before I looked at the draft levels of service and the KPIs. The question I have is a minor one, but if you could help with an answer, be great. On page 153 of Boardworks, under the regulatory services, I'm looking along the level of services and measures, the baseline, and then the trend. And what I'm seeing in this is there seems to be a trend of where a lot of the measures are not applicable. So when I look at those areas, housing, regulatory, and over those measures, have we got no prior trend that could fit inside there that we have from actual historical data? Or has it changed that significantly? We can't put a measurable trend in there instead of not applicable.
So through you, Chair, those ones are ones that are set by the DIA,
right?
And they are required to be 100%. So the trend column is really just to give you at a glance, is this something that we're trying to increase, to maintain, or in the case of, for example, waste to landfill, there are some ones we're trying to decrease. So the trend line is for information. We could change not applicable to maintained. That would mean the same.
It doesn't tell me anything. It says that one, we're not, it gives me more of a negative glance over it, that we're not achieving something when it's got not applicable, because it's, where's the measure? The measure's there, but it's
simply another way of communicating the information. It's about the trend line. There are targets for every year, though.
Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just diverted off there. Yep. Any other questions? Oh, Grant, sorry.
Yeah, just page 145 of Board Books. The Queen's Park accredited National Garden of National Significance. Does that preclude the use of Queen's Park in any form in terms of functionality, like by striving for a really high benchmark like that, does that prevent sort of it being used, as we've heard from Active Southland earlier in the hearing, just with people just using it in a normal way? Will it mean there's areas, taken out that are just for view as opposed to could be used for activity?
I can't answer the specifics around what goes into that award for national significance, but I'm certainly not aware of any limitations of use. But we could come back with further information from the parks team on that.
yeah, I suppose we've got to find a balance. We don't want it to be a beautiful park that no one can functionally use and get benefit out of as a community. And we've just heard from Active Southland how valuable they see it as part of a city jewel. So it's finding the balance. I think it's important to try.
I guess the other issue is to what amount of resources do we portion to keep that standard up, which could be used elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Evelyn?
Kia ora, just through you, Mr. Itakuramashwa, to Rhiannon and Patricia. The satisfaction surveys, have we got a way of filtering out people who adversely affect statistics, say the quality of bus transport, when they never ever use bus transport, but they reflect negatively on it? You know, some of the systems that you use for satisfaction surveys give you a tree which takes you in a direction depending on whether you answer yes or no. It's the same with the buses, with the library or the pools. Is there a way of filtering out the people who are negative for the sake of being negative, as opposed to those who actively use a service?
So, Rhiannon, before you answer that, it raises a really interesting point around, do you survey the community about whether the library's good, or do you survey the people that use the library?
Yeah.
And the former, we do it at risk, because some people just don't agree with libraries and don't agree with buses either. And so that ends up giving us poor results, or poorer results than we might get if we just canvass the people that use the facilities.
So, correct. The way that we survey at the moment is for all the KPIs, we are surveying users of those services. So when we survey the residents, there is a skip logic within the system that the researchers use. And if you don't use the buses, then you are not asked the questions about what your satisfaction is. We do frequently use the residents survey to get information from people who are not users. We'll vary questions on a quarterly basis. So, for example, we've asked people who don't use the library, why don't you use the library? Is there a reason? And that's helped inform library decision making. So it is a really good tool to reach right across the network and people who use and don't use services, and that flexibility that we have every quarter does give us an ability. But you can be assured that the satisfaction results are from those who use the services.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, because I mean, we had an example a couple of days ago when we did the Lower S Street submissions that came in. One of the people that came in to submit admitted to me that they haven't been to the mall, ICL, or haven't been into S Street since we've upgraded. And so that sort of made it a little bit hard for me to understand what they were asking for without knowing what we'd already provided. Like a little bit, you're taking away Waka, but I actually haven't seen what you've got in it as a replacement. Grant.
Yeah, I'll move.
You'll move. Excellent. Second, Ria. Any further discussions? There being none. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Somebody would like to move us to go out of... No?
It's done.
Oh, no. Oh, we're at the end of the meeting. I just need a beard for tonight, because I've got to go home and tell my other half that it was option one. Yeah, exactly.
Have you been offered alternative accommodation?
Yeah, probably.
I'm sure you could camp
It's
out
called a
in
doghouse, I
there.
think. Yeah, she'll be listening to this live, unfortunately.
Well,
So, just before we go off, just like to thank those that are on have been on live stream, and we're about to disappear.